So we have one more minute before we get started. I'm gonna go ahead and just talk about our past webinars before we go ahead and get started with the presentation on the screen. Udaan has done we started off with a high school webinar where we did a pathway through high school where we explained and everyone on the youth board gave their opinion and their perspective on their high school journey and gave our recommendations to how we think what classes you should take during high school, honors versus AP, just all that type of stuff. So that was our very first webinar from freshman year to senior year. Extracurriculars, all of that. And then our next one was how to pick your college major. And we did that one fairly recently. It was just, we chose about, I want to say 5 to 6 majors that were popular, including biological sciences, engineering, marketing, business, and we gave a little background on them and if you're interested in certain things, which one could be the match for you. We also gave out PDFs that would help you choose your college major. And now we are on to a career webinar, and that's what we're hoping to continue, just a bunch of pathways that will help people make decisions that will hopefully better their life and career. We're hoping to also do one where we have a panel, and within that panel we'll have professionals who have been in the career, in their game for a while now. So maybe like a few from who have graduated with a biological science major and just giving their perspective as to what they've done, how they did it, how they feel now, what they would have done differently, just that stuff. So if you're interested in that, please do let us know. If it's like biological sciences, political science, marketing, if you're interested in anything, just please let us know. Yes, I will address this question really quick before we get started. We will share the PowerPoint and the recording. Just go ahead and personally send me your email in the chat, and we can add you to our mailing list, and we will give you all of that information. It is also on our Facebook page, so if you want to go and give that page a like, you'll be able to follow up. Okay, great. Yes, like Simone said, feel free to email info@Sahayata and we will send the PDFs. Okay, I'm getting some emails. That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, Udaan. Udaan is a Sahayata initiative, and our goal is to empower the youth. So I'm going to start off with what is Sahayata. Sahayata is a nonprofit organization committing to educating, supporting, and uplifting the underprivileged members of society. We accomplish this through healthcare initiatives, education sponsorships, vocational training, and affiliated partner nonprofit organizations. We are a 100% volunteer-run organization with teams in the US, Canada, and India. Udaan is our youth initiative. So in Hindi and Punjabi, Udaan literally means to uplift or to fly. Udaan is Sahayata's latest initiative intended to foster an environment of leadership with youth guiding the youth. Our goal is to uplift the youth with unique resources and learning opportunities and further build a network of trust and perspective so that students like you can feel supported. This will in turn provide a foundation of familiarity and understanding that many parents or guardians may not be able to provide, especially if from an immigrant background. This is our Sahayata Youth Board. Alongside myself, I have Supreet, Jolene, Sumit, Raina, Jasveet, Sumit, and Samreen. Some of them have joined me today. Thank you so much. What are Pathways? Pathways is an educational webinar series organized by the Sahayata Youth Board. Our first webinar, like I said earlier, was about navigating through high school and preparing for college. Future webinars will touch on topics such as life after high school, like we just did the college major one, traditional versus vocational paths, mentorship, and more. If you have any ideas or you want to join us on the youth board or in Iran or just Sahayata and be the helping hand, contact us at info@sahayata.org. I will say that once again at the end just to remind you guys. But other than that, I'm done with my part, and now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Harjis Berk. He's going to go ahead and share his screen, and we will get started on the medical.
All right, thank you, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. I just want to thank Rev Noor for organizing this. It's easy for me to just show up, but there's a lot of stuff that goes in the background for this to make it successful, including you guys who joined. So while I'll try to tailor this talk to everybody, but kind of my perspective is kind of focusing on college, making the transition to medical school. I went to college, I went to medical school. Places I want to go to. So it's my pleasure to sort of share some tips and sort of tricks on how to get your best foot forward in this sort of competitive process. Okay. So I wanted to start by saying first, if there's a will, there's a way. Anybody can truly, I believe, become a doctor. It's not that challenging, but you got to have focus. It's sort of an algorithm. So there's steps you need to follow at certain points in your career. And if you can do that, then you will find a way. And there'll be challenges along the way. I've had so many, and I'm going through some as well. But each challenge is a learning process. And if it was easy, then we wouldn't be having a talk like this on it because everybody would know how to do it, right? This I have one slide on high school sort of spectrum here. So for high school, if you're in high school listening to this talk, your main focus should be getting to a college that has a strong pre-medical program, because when you're applying to medical school, the sort of caliber of your college can matter sometimes, and you have to go to a place that has a good pre-medical courses and good support for those pre-medical classes so you can do well in them. So the UCs and everything are fantastic, but let's say you want to go to a rural college in Maine or something, Massachusetts, you need to do your research and make sure that that place has a good pre-medical program that'll kind of make you a competitive medical school applicant. So that should be your goal in high school. In high school, it's not like there's many clubs or committees. The main thing is GPA. In order to get to a good college, the GPA rank is really important. So the college I wanted to go to, Stanford, their biggest thing is rank. They really care what your rank is. So I kind of focused on that, and that was my goal. And then, of course, SATs are very big in high school. I think they've changed the grading criteria at least a couple times since I had taken that exam. But I'd say GPA and SATs take away in high school. They'll put you in the best position to get into a good college. Okay. But I want to focus more on college and the timeline. So I want to start off by saying, some people feel like they have to enter the first week of college with a major. That's not true. Some people take 3 years to decide, and you don't necessarily need to do a science major if you want to become a doctor. It's actually sometimes, we'll talk about this later, it's more appealing if you're not a science major, but that doesn't mean you should go and do English literature if you're no interest in it. But I'm just saying, if you decide to do something that is not medical, it's totally fine, because you'll still have to do just core prerequisite classes for medical school. The benefit of doing, so it's, at Stanford, I was a biology major. The benefit of doing that is, then you have to do the classes anyway. And I didn't have to do any extra classes. So I finished in 3 years. I saved some time and got to spend extra year with my family before I went to medical school. It was nice. So I just want to say time flies pretty quickly. So year one, you'll be taking general chemistry, biology. This classes you see here are regardless of what your major will be. And year two, if you want to become a doctor, you'll take organic chemistry, physics, Year 3, you'll start preparing for the Mcat, and you'll start like shadowing and working in the hospital. As you free up time from those hard classes, then you got to transition to preparing for your application, which we'll talk about next. So I want to start off by saying in college, it's really important. I was mentioning in high school, it's not so important, but in college, your extracurriculars are extremely important because they'll help distinguish you when you're applying to medical school. And when I was at UCSF for medical school, I was on the admissions committee. There was 10 of us, 2 students, one of which was me, and around 8 professors. And we went through maybe, all the thousands of applications and interviewed people and selected people. So this talk is kind of things we were looking for. Everyone volunteers at a hospital. And unfortunately, that means you kind of have to do it too, but it means that you need to do things additional in college. So, one thing I did, and that Ravnur is leading and helping now is I went to a clinic in India, Dharamsala, India, which is the home of the Dalai Lama, where they treat Tibetan refugees. So people with a lot of chronic healthcare conditions. And I worked at the clinic there for a summer. And I made a program where every subsequent summer, we send students from Stanford and Merced, Davis, Berkeley, whoever wants to go, we send them to that clinic to volunteer because they needed people to come. They needed manpower at that time. And so that was something that probably helped me get into the medical schools I wanted to get into, was finding an unmet need and doing something out of the box. Because everybody's going to be volunteering in a hospital and shadowing. You got to try to find something unique that will help you stand out. It doesn't need to be more than one thing, but for me, it ended up being just that one thing. I think helped me stick out a lot, and was a basis of many questions I received in my interviews. So important thing is you should start focusing on your extracurriculars the first year of college, because I'll tell you exactly why. Because my next slide is the length of duration is seen as a directly proportional to commitment. So if you do something amazing, but it's only for like a week, it's not viewed as impressively as you do something for 2 or 3 years. Because like you can imagine, like we're all on this, everybody listening here is potentially interested in becoming a doctor. It's a long track. So similarly, they want to see that your extracurriculars, you're doing something over a long period of time. You're not just skipping around to what's easy or if you're getting bored. So the longer you do something, the better. And that's actually good, because the longer you do it, the more likely you are to get better like letters of recommendation from it and things like that, which we'll talk about later. And I also want to say, like, when people say extracurriculars, it's also important when you're applying to medical school. So like when I was at UCSF, we liked applicants who put in an application that they like, photography, piano, things like that, because being a doctor is more than just doing research and shadowing. We wanted to see that there are people who have interest outside of medicine and outside of the hospital. I think it's really important. Just want to make sure everybody can hear me okay, and then I'll proceed. We'll go to letters of recommendation. This is pretty crucial. So the guidelines for this are always changing, but a good general guideline is one should be from a science professor, specifically a professor who was teaching you in your major. So I had one of the biology, professors at Stanford write me a letter. But one thing, you always have to be a step ahead. You got to think, like, if you're at a college with a big major, there'll be a lot of applicants, a lot of people in your class. So how are you going to get a letter compared to 200 people in your class? So you can sometimes do smaller, like elective courses in your major. So I had, there's like biology, like 101 introduction, but there's also like smaller classes like in biology or whatever your major is, and you can go to those classes and get to know the professor. So that'll be really important, because those classes, there'll only be 10 or 15 people, so you'll have a higher chance of getting to establish a relationship with your mentor. So this is important, because these are things you need to think about early on. Probably your first couple months of college is finding those classes which are small enough such that they will allow you to establish a good relationship with your professor. Then another letter recommendation you'll need to apply to medical school is one from a doctor in a field that you intend to go into. We'll talk about this later, but when you apply to medical school, you don't need to know anything about which specialty you want to go into, but one should be from like a doctor at like one of those hospitals you were shadowing at. saying that this is a good person, was able to talk and relate to patients and get a history and physical, things like that. And then they always want a letter of recommendation from a non-science professor. The reason that's important is because when we were at UCSF, when I was selecting applicants, we wanted to make sure, was this somebody who only focused on their science classes and blew off their like English classes and stuff and did not form a relationship with us professors. So I had a letter of recommendation from an English professor. So it's really important, actually. The application will ask from a non-science person to write you a letter. So these are things you got to think about in your first year of college, because the longer you know the professor, the better the letter will be. So it's not like you can ask them a month before the application is due. It's really important too, in these colleges where everybody's going to go to, there's a lot of students, and you can imagine how many people are asking them to write a letter. So don't be shy. You ask the person, can you write me a good letter of recommendation? Because it hasn't happened to me, but I know some people it's happened where, say, can you write me a letter of recommendation? And they write a bad one, or they write like a mediocre one, and that can hurt you a lot. That hurts you big time. So it's important to ask them, can you write me a good letter of recommendation? So start thinking about it like this in your first sort of year of college. You need one from a science professor, one from a non-science professor, and one from an MD. Now, I want to go to the Mcat. So the Mcat's super important. You take it in your third year. They just changed the grading and it has a biology, chemistry, and critical reasoning. And I think you type an essay. But the thing is, a lot of people think that like the college they go to, the pre-medical coursework will prepare them enough for the MCAT. For me, it didn't. So at Stanford, you're doing all these big classes, and other places too. They don't necessarily prepare you for like the specific sort of questions the MCAT is asking. So it's really important, don't feel pressured, but if you and your family can afford it, it's good to do sort of like a, Kaplan or Princeton Review MCAT course in your second or third year, after you've done those core classes that I mentioned on the first or second slide, like biology, chemistry, physics, things that, those things you learn in college will form a foundation. And then once you do the MCAT course, that can hone you in on the specific questions that you should be, because like for the MCAT, there's always some specific questions they ask. So if you take a course or you get a book and you go through it, then those will become easy points the day of the test. And, it's good to get as all the easy points you can get. So that's a glimpse of the MCAT. This is really important. So college GPA. So when we were selecting applicants at UCSF, which is probably the most selected medical school in the country, we really looked at GPA as a big thing. So, but we break it apart. So we break it up: science GPA, it should be above a 3.6 or above. And then we break it up a non-science GPA, which should be higher because there's easier classes. So the reason we break it up is because if it's just one GPA and somebody's like taking a bunch of easy like literature classes, then that could fluff up their actual GPA. So we look at the science GPA, see how is this person doing in those core classes that they need for the MCAT, like we discussed: chemistry, physics, biology, etc. But this is a tip that worked really well for me. So I think at Stanford I had like a 3.7. It wasn't amazing, but it did the job for me. So for a tip for me is that, so when you go to your college, if you're in college now, you should see if you can do research credits. So like I did some research. We'll talk about that later. And it allowed me to get credit towards my science GPA. So like if I put a certain number of hours a week, then I would get a certain number of credits towards my science GPA. So I was able to boost it up a little bit like that. So that's actually a little bit of a trick a lot of people don't know, which worked out really well, to help increase my GPA, because the science classes can be super hard at all places. And so if you can maintain a simple trick like this, it really helped me out. So this could be something you're thinking about in your first and second year of college, is like, are there any credits I can get towards my science GPA by doing research or doing shadowing? Because a lot of colleges do have that capacity. Another thing that's really important I want to go through is it's all about creating your story. So just to kind of put it in perspective, I think UCSF, the year, well, I was there for 4 or 5 years for medical school, but the year I was on the admissions committee, which was my last year of medical school, I think we had 2,000 applications and maybe 300 people got interviewed from that and 150 got in. So when we're looking at all those applications, it's hard to distinguish like Mr. X from Mr. Y. So like for another example, everyone is shadowing in a hospital, but things that stand out is like somebody who worked at like a clinic in a different country. This is all pre-COVID times, so we know the situation is different now, but people who like found an unmet need in their college, like that there wasn't a shadowing in an underserved area, and they went and helped set up a network where people can go help underserved in that area. So small things like that can actually distinguish you as an applicant. So I like to make this analogy, like applying to medical school is like, you're kind of like making sauce for a meal. Like the sauce is what makes a meal good, like pasta, the sauce is what makes it unique. So your sauce is going to be a combination of like your GPA, extracurriculars, letters recognition, and Mcat. But so actually what my sauce was I'm a Sikh with a passion for underserved medicine. I found that shadowing opportunity in the clinic in India. And then I wanted to go to UCSF because they had a lot of underserved medicine too, in the Bay Area. So that was kind of my story. And the reason this is important is because when I was an admissions officer, and you can imagine we're going through all those hundreds of applications, at some point everybody looks the same. So it helps if we literally end up describing an applicant we like by one sentence. So like, this is Mr. Singh who went to had to take a year off in college because of a challenge, but came back, did excellent, and opened a clinic, and now wants to come to medical school. That would be like, for example, a sentence which would help us distinguish other applicants from that applicant. So you have to think of a way early on in college to distinguish yourself, because everyone's going to have a GPA, everyone's going to have an MCAT, and those are all numbers. But you have the capacity to distinguish yourself by doing really unique extracurricular activities. And that's why, if you noted, that was the first thing I talked about in the presentation. The importance of having excellent extracurricular activities can really be the thing that propels you from like a maybe mediocre medical school to a better one. And I told you guys I'd come back to this, is choosing a specialty. This is just a graph. It's not meant to be like sort of read through. It's small font to just show all the specialties in medicine, probably not even all of them. So this is showing that you're not expected to, in college, know anything about, I want to be a brain surgeon or family medicine doctor or pathologist. You just have to know, I want to go to medical school. And in medical school, you're not even needing to decide until your third year. So you have a lot of time to decide what specialty you want to do. And the reason it's important to know that is I always knew in high school what I wanted to do, but I think that's probably a rare thing. It's good to keep an open mind. So like when you go to college, you can shadow in different things, in different specialties. So like say I shadowed a cardiologist and a nephrologist. So that shows you're open to, learning more about medicine. And it's important not to feel like pigeonholed that you need to choose a specialty early on, because in medical school, the deadline is like your third year. So you have plenty of time to choose a specialty. And that's kind of what I noted here. So in medical school, in your second or third year, you'll rotate in different specialties like medicine, psychiatry, neurology, surgery. And only after that do they expect you to give a decision. And, for those people who are listening here who may want to plan ahead, getting into residency can be competitive. So it may be good to take like a research year in medical school. So that's why I was at UCSF for 5 years. In between my third and fourth year, I did a year of research, a Howard Hughes Fellowship. So I did a lot of I was interested in brain tumors. So we did a lot of studying of mice models of brain tumors and how to treat them over a year. And I think that's kind of become, unfortunately, necessary to get into good residencies now. They want to see somebody who's taken some time to do something a little bit extra, like whether founding a clinic or doing some research. And the problem is when everybody does it, it sort of becomes not a requirement, but a disadvantage if you yourself don't do it. So I ended up taking that year off in medical school. But I know we're all, India, and our parents were like, no, don't take a year off. My parents were like, why you want to take a year off? But I took it off and I had a great time. Like doing research, I got to spend more time with my family. I was in San Francisco. I got to explore the city. So 1 year and thinking back is not a big deal. 1 or 2 years if needed. And that's all my slides, but I kind of kept it short because I think the best way to learn here is to ask questions. So you can ask me any questions you guys want, and happy to answer it from the perspective of the admissions officer at UCSF.
We have one question in the chat. It is, are there some medical programs that are shorter in length than others?
Yeah. So there are some programs that are shorter, but only if you apply out of high school. So like if you're applying from college to medical school, all med schools are 4 years. But from high school, there are a couple programs. I think there's one at USC. There's one at Kansas City, which means like you go to that place for college and medical school combined. So Kansas City is 6 years, USC is 8 years, Georgia, Washington, and DC is 7 years. But I actually applied to those, and I got into those programs I was mentioning, but I decided to go to just a regular college, Stanford, and I know a lot of people did those fast tracks, and it kind of takes away from the college experience and things. And trust me, like taking 1 or 2 extra years to do, take your time in college and meet people is actually really important, because you'll form a lot of connections that are really important by actually taking the 4 years in college and then taking the 4 years in medical school. So kind of rushing it is a mentality I had also, but I wouldn't stress about that too much. But to answer your question in short, if you're applying from high school, there are programs that are shorter, like the ones I named. If you're applying from college, they're all the same. They're all 4 years.
I'm just going to leave this slide up here so we have something to look at while we go through the questions. But yeah, so I also have a few questions. How should you choose the med schools you apply to?
Yeah, I think for me, it was kind of geographical. I wanted to be close to my family. We're in Redding, California, pretty close to my family. And so I wanted to go to I wanted to stay in the Bay Area. So I went to UCSF. But what's really important is if you can think of a specialty that you want to go into, if you have an idea, it's good to choose a medical school, which has a good department in that specialty. Because once you go to medical school, you're going to have to be thinking about the same things. It's not like you get in a medical and you're done. It just starts there. You got to start thinking about the same things over. There's a medical school version of the Mcat. There's med school GPA, med school letter recommendation. You have to think about everything like that. So I think what's actually really important is medical school is a time you should be enjoying. And so you need to find a place geographically, probably close to your family, because medical school can get super intense. So it helped for me, like when my parents would come visit on weekends and things like that. So that was my big consideration.
Another question we have in the chat is, can you change your specialty during the program?
Just want to clarify. So, well, once you're in residency, you can't change your specialty. That'd be a disaster, because then you have to apply again into something else. But once you're in like medical school, you should totally have a free mind, and that's why by your third year of medical school, they'll require you to declare a specialty. Like, I want to become a plastic surgeon. You got to tell them, because then they can help you apply to plastic surgery programs. But once you're in a plastic surgery program, like, it'd be really hard to change to something else. You can, you definitely can, but it just be challenging. And that's another reason I was telling you guys, it's important to take your time and think of what you want to do, and take those rotations in medical school that they offer to really find out what you can imagine doing for many, many years.
We have one on the Facebook Live. It says, I heard the SAT isn't really required this year in some colleges because of Corona, but would you say to still do it?
Yeah, I would say, I haven't heard that, but I'd say you should do it. programs will always think, it's not required, etc. But if you do it and do it well, obviously that'll look better than somebody who hasn't done it. So I would prepare with the mentality that you need to do it, because the SAT is not that hard of a test, and you'll start taking it, and your studying practices will help you for the Mcat, and that'll help you for the test you have to take in residency and things. So I would still take the SAT, because trust me, if programs say optional, it doesn't really mean optional. It means you need to do it.
We have another one, pros and cons of attending medical school outside of the mainland of the United States, so like in the Caribbean.
Yeah,
What
I think like I was born in London, and my sister went to medical school in London because she wanted to be close to my grandparents. It's not a bad thing, but I think, when you're looking at the applications to like residency, you're looked at with a little bit less rigor, and it's harder to get in, I think. So if you're like, unless you have a reason you want to go out of the US, like for family reasons, that's fine, but you should always apply with the intent that you want to stay in the US, because if you do, I think your path will be a lot easier, because you can imagine like people, like everyone here we're talking to today is probably in college or high school in the US. But if you're applying, like if you go to the Caribbean and you're applying to medical school in the US, you're also in the pool of people in the Caribbean colleges applying to medical school in the US. So it's better to try to do medical school in the US. You'll be more competitive, and it'll make your pathway easier. Yeah. And you guys are happy to, ask me anything, and I'll tell you honestly. I have no more links to UCSF. I'll tell you exactly what we were thinking and how we selected everybody.
What are what are some of the main things you looked for when admitting students?
All right, Freddie Gonzalez. Some of the big things we look for when we're admitting students was kind of what I talked about for the last 30 minutes, but I'll try to summarize it. So we're looking for a unique person who's done some sort of unique extracurricular activity, and somebody who has a reason for applying to that medical school. So I'll tell you guys another big tip. So when you apply to medical school, they'll have some optional boxes of why specifically do you want to come to our medical school. So like, why UC Davis instead of UCLA, and that is optional. But kind of what I mentioned earlier, not when optional, it's not, doesn't mean it's optional. But when you can imagine you're applying to hundreds of medical schools, people don't want to take that time and say, I want to go to UCLA because Professor Smith is there and I want to work with him. They don't want to do the extra work. But when we were selecting applicants, if we had like somebody email us or in the application say, I want to come to UCLA because they have an amazing biology class I'm passionate about that biology class and I want to come, whatever, something like that, then that makes it more attractive than an applicant who's just applying, checking the box and saying send my application to UCLA. So I'd say main things we're looking at is somebody who's expressed interest in that medical school and somebody who has also done well in college. Unfortunately, like if your GPA is not good, then it can get a little bit harder to like get considered when we're looking at all those applications. So that's why like GPA and Mcat and those numbers, if you think about it like a pyramid, are the base of the pyramid. You got to have those. Once you have those, and you can start sort of making yourself selective by choosing interesting extracurricular activities and things like that.
Another one is, any idea about pursuing medical program in Canada? Will you be allowed to practice in the US after completion of the program?
Yeah, that's a great question. People can do medical school in Canada. People have family there, or they can even go. And I think that's viewed better than going to the Caribbean or like India or something for medical school. You would have to do the Canadian residency, and then before you can come to the US, you'd have to do like our USMLE, which is actually a pain in the ass test for medical school, for residency. So you'd have to do that test, because they would want to make sure, like, is the stuff they taught you in Canada, is that translatable for you to be practicing in the US? So it's total, I would say, like, if you don't get into like a program in the US, it's not a big deal. I would probably choose Canada over like other international programs, but you would have to take a American test after you're done in Canada to make sure you're suitable to practice in the US.
Another one we have in the chat is, how are post-bac programs seen by admissions counselors?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, when we were looking at that, post-bac programs, so post-bac programs, it's like if you're in post-bac programs are things that you have to do if you have to do it. So like if you have a low GPA or something, then you can do a post-bac and you basically take like an extra year to do research or something and help build your GPA up. So to us, it actually looked good. And we didn't discriminate against those candidates because I think in my year, we had maybe 6 or 7 post-bac students at UCSF. And post-bac it's viewed as a good thing because it's viewed as somebody who didn't give up, who maybe had a family issue or didn't do good on a test or didn't do good on GPA and had to take some extra time and make it up and do some research or whatever. And it's viewed as overcoming a challenge. And if you guys remember, my second slide was on this. There's all challenges. And so when we're, we want to see people overcome those. And so when we're looking in the application about that, and we see somebody who didn't give up and did well in a post-bac program, they're on equal level as somebody who was applying straight out and did good all along.
We have another one. Do medical schools take an upward trend in their grades into account when viewing a candidate?
Yeah, that's really important. When I first went to Stanford, I missed my parents a lot, and I didn't do that good in my first quarter. Like when I went to Stanford, I thought like I was the smartest person there, and then I found out like after the first week, any college like this, everybody's from different experiences, and they're all really good. So my first quarter wasn't that good, but then I sort of like picked it up. So you're exactly right. It's like if your GPA is going up every single year, it's viewed totally okay. But if you start out like the first and second year strong and then you go down, that's a problem. That's where, as admission counselors, we say, this is somebody who either slacked off or somebody who got bored in the first couple of years and did not take the grade seriously. And that's not somebody we had wanted because, medicine's a long pathway. We don't want you to get bored and quit. So we want to see somebody who overcomes struggles. So, and if somebody is like doing excellent in all 4 years, then they also seem kind of weird. Like, who's this person is doing great in everything? Are they not doing any other activities or they're just studying all day? So I think definitely don't be discouraged if your first year isn't that good or second year. Every year should just be better than the others. And we will easily be able to see that because in the application, it breaks down your science GPA in each year. So that was one of the first things at UCSF we looked at was, are people plateauing or are they declining or are they peaking, getting better every single year? That's a good question.
Another one is, as an admissions counselor, if you have 2 candidates, all things being equal, one coming directly from completing their bachelor's and another that has taken time off to do a fellowship or other work, which one is more likely to be accepted?
Yeah, that's a great question. So those people would be viewed equally in my UCSF. So somebody who took some time off and did something productive, even regardless of the reason they had to take a time off, it was like a family illness or they're trying to make up for some bad grades or something, that's okay. But the important thing is when you do take a time off, it becomes really important that you do something during that time off in college or medical school or whatever. So like if you take time off, like you should be shadowing, you should be doing research and publishing. It's not like you should just be hanging out at home. So if you do take time off and you do a fellowship or something like you mentioned and you do it well, you're considered equally as somebody who didn't have to take time off and kind of went straight through. You can also think about it differently is if you took that time off and did well, it's actually an advantage. It makes you stick out from others who went straight through. So if you did something well in that year off and it's something unique, that can help you stick out. And that could be something you write about in your personal statement. It's also important. These are all good questions. You guys can ask me anything. And, but yeah, I think what's important, big thing is just when you're in college is you have to maintain your GPA. You're still gonna have to be studying for the Mcat and doing like all these activities, But unfortunately, if your GPA is like falling and falling, then it becomes harder to, at some point, it becomes hard to make up for that with other things. So if you can maintain a stable GPA and sort of build that base of the pyramid like we talked about, then you can start focusing on other things. But like, you shouldn't be like doing extracurriculars and forgetting about the importance of maintaining good grades, because that's the basis of what they looked at in medical school applications.
Another one is there an early decision for med schools? If yes, should I apply for early decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. There, not that I know of. Yeah, I know for like college and stuff, there's like Stanford, Columbia, like early decision. But for medical school, unless it's changed in the last 4 or 5 years, there's nothing I'm aware of for early action for medical school. What I want to point out, what's really interesting is when you interview at medical school, now it's going to be probably over Zoom, but it's important you ask them questions too, because you're going to a place where you're going to be for 4 years, and you have to get something out of that place. They have to help you get to your next level. You will become a doctor from that place. Your resume will always say, I went to this medical school. So you got to ask them, what activities do you have? Um, you know, how do students who come to this medical school, where do they end up going after? What type of doctor do they become? You have to ask these medical schools, to see, will you do well there? Is there, for example, it was important to me when I went there, they had a good, brain department. I can do research and things like that. It's important they had a good, Sikh association. So, I can hang out with those people. And I think UCSF had all that for me, and it worked out luckily.
Can you read your letters of recommendation, or do they have to be sealed?
That's a great question. Yeah, your letters of recommendation will be uploaded by the letter writer automatically online, and you can check if you want to read it, but it's pretty much expected that you hit waive the rights to reading it, because you don't want to put your professor in any pressure. Um, uh, if you think about it, like if somebody's looking over your shoulder, you do something more carefully, and you're just not being your natural self. So they expect you to always hit I waive my rights to view this letter, and that's to be totally fine, because if you're asking the right person and somebody's agreeing to write you a letter, they'll write it well if you had a good relationship. So you don't have to read it. You just trust that they'll give you a good letter. But that's a good question.
Another one we have from Facebook is, what is something you wish you knew before applying to med school, and what would you tell your younger self? That's all one question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like for me, I was very, very focused in high school, like college, medical school. I didn't want to take any time off. And my parents didn't want me to take much time off either. But I realized, life is short, and like me taking that year off in medical school to do research was probably one of the best years I've ever had. Like, I got to form relationships, spend time with people, like hang out, explore the city. So if I was looking back to myself, I would have said, take things a little bit slower. So I think I mentioned earlier, I finished college in 3 years, but now I kind of miss Stanford. When I was there, I wanted to leave, but now I'm not there. I want to go back. So that extra year would have been nice to do different classes and things like that. So I think it's important to stay on the track, but don't necessarily go too fast where you derail off the track. That's kind of what I'd say to myself if I was thinking back. Taking a year there, a year or two, here and there is totally fine, as long as you do something. And a lot of people have family reasons they have to take a year off, and so it's not looked at negatively. It's looked at as a positive thing, as you overcoming a challenge.
How and where do I apply for med school? So I think they mean there's one for all the UCs.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, when your med school will send you, your college will send you an application for medical school. It's all online, and you literally just it'll show all the medical schools, and you just check a box. I want to apply to this one. I want to apply this one. Unfortunately, it can get super expensive, because I think each one, I don't remember what it was. They can be very, very expensive. But this is why you got to save up, and maybe your family can help support you, because for medical school, you got to apply everywhere. You don't know where you'll end up. Where you'll end up, especially like a year like this where there's COVID, and like they'll be interviewing people over Zoom. Uh, it's better because you save like money from interviewing and flying and stuff, but you got to maximize your chances by applying everywhere you can. So it's an easy central application that your college will send to you when you're ready to apply. And that's also the same application that letter writers will will upload their letters to automatically.
We have one that's asking, how did you specifically study for the MCAT?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's really important is some people say, I'm just going to do really good in college and not study for the MCAT. And that ends up a bad decision, because like those high-end biology classes and whatever you need to take to get into medical school don't prepare you necessarily for the MCAT. So, uh, so what I did was, I'm not a good test taker at all. I think the year I got into UCSF, I had one of the lowest MCATs that year, but I had other really good things to make up for it, like the GPA and extracurriculars and letters of recommendation and things like that. But what I did was I did a Princeton review course, which I think it's kind of become necessary now because everybody does it. I think it's pretty expensive, maybe $1,000 or $2,000 when I did it, but they give you an unlimited question bank. So like questions you can just do at home or like on your phone in your car. Like if you can imagine, like, reading a book like this and the text and stuff is only so good, but if somebody gives you questions and then you get in the format of how the test will be, then you'll do better and you'll be faster the day of the test. So I did a Princeton Review question bank. I think it's like they give you 2,000 questions and you just do them all and you get prepared for the MCAT.
Did you save significantly staying in state?
That's a good question. The college I went to was super expensive. UCSF, I think, I think it was a lot cheaper. That wasn't a reason at all I chose it, but because it's in state, like UC medical schools are very like budget friendly, like um, that maybe you're paying like 27,000, 30, 40,000 a year versus like 70, 80,000 a year somewhere else, right? So, but that's only like if you're in California and you stay in California, but like let's you're in like Nevada and you want to go to University of Arizona, it'll be cheaper for you too. So you should definitely stay in a place like that. I mean, try for those places because all that money can add up, and you're lucky if your family supports you. But if you can save, that'll be good. And I'll bring up another question that I think is important, or perspective. Is some people say like, is it better to go to like University of Arizona medical school and do really good, or go to UCSF and do average? Um, you can spend like all day debating that, right? But it's better to just go where you think you'll be happy and do well. But like from when we had an admissions counselor, like if we saw somebody at University of Arizona who did like really good, and somebody at UCSF who maybe had a little bit less grades or GPA there, we would view them as equal because UCSF you consider a little bit harder than University of Arizona. So that's why it can get complicated debating all day. Like people say who's a better basketball player, that Jordan or LeBron. Anybody can say anything they want. You just have to choose one and justify it. So you just have to go to your medical school and do well there. Then you don't need to worry if I was at that place, would it have been easier or harder? Just where you go, just make the most out of it.
Another one we have is, what is the difference between MD and DO, and is it important to know during the application process?
Yeah. So like, that's a great question. My dad's a doctor. He's an MD. He's a neurologist. And like, I'll tell you, in practice, when you're actually like making money as a doctor, it doesn't matter. Like nobody says, are you MD or DO? But like when you're applying to like medical school and residency, it makes a big deal, I think. So I think technically DO, you're not trained on some of the specific things MDs are. There's a lot more restrictions of like what you can and can't do. Uh, it's better to become an MD if you can. You have more options. It's also a little bit of a more respect thing. But that being said, DO schools are easier to get into. So if you can't get to an MD, you can still do a DO and you'll still be a doctor who can see patients. And then, like I was saying, like 10, 15 years down the line, nobody will ever ask nor care, what's happening. And you probably make a little bit less money as DO, but I don't know much about that. But I'd say, it's preferable to do MD if you can. But I'll put it this way. As an MD, you can do everything a DO can, but not vice versa.
So now you're a resident, right?
Yes.
Would you say it was harder to get into med school or get a residency?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably harder to get a residency. That's why, like, I want everybody listening to know, like, it's not like you get into college and you get in med school, it's done. It's always a process of self-improvement and getting better. But I think like getting into a medical school and getting into a good one sets the stage for getting to a good residency. It's all like building up on that pyramid we talked about. But I think it also depends what you want to do in residency. So like if you want to do like a specific surgery, like plastic surgery, it can be really competitive. But if you want to do internal medicine, it's not that, I mean, it's all hard, but it's a lot easier. So like there may be like 1,000 openings for internal medicine a year, and maybe there's 100 for plastic surgery. So it becomes hard in that way. But I'd say they're all hard in their own ways, is how I would answer that.
Sorry. We have one that asks, how many times did you take the MCAT?
Oh, me? Oh, sorry. What was the question again?
How many times did you take the MCAT?
Oh, I took it once. I think you can take it twice, though. I took the SAT twice. I remember one time I didn't do good, and my dad came in the room. He like shouted at me that you need to take it again. I took it again, and it worked out good. But MCAT, you only want to take that really once, so you want to do good on it, right? Because like if you imagine in college, you'll be busy with extracurricular GPA. You don't want to keep studying for the same test over and over. You got to take it once and do well in it. It's also costs money to take that test, so you don't want to think in your mind like I can take this 2 times. You got to take it one and move on to the next task.
Another question we have is, what can you do if you don't match to a residency program?
That's a good question. So your medical, if you do everything kind of we talked about here, you'll match. Matching is not a problem. It becomes a problem like matching if it's a place you want to go to. Like, is it a place where a good state or something like that? Good geography. You should match if you do the right thing. But if you don't match for some reason, um, you know, you can do things like research. You take a year off and do research. It'll help you. It'll actually make you a very strong candidate. But if you don't match, and like, let's say you don't have anything like family reason where you have to like take care of your parents. If you're just sitting at home, like that can really hurt you. But if you don't match and you do something about it, like, you work at a clinic for a year, or you shadow a doctor for a year, or you do like an MCAT teaching course, all that is showing you that like, look, life is not meant to be easy, and you had a challenge and you did something about it. And so then you apply again the next year, you'll get in. It's not that challenging. I think, let me bring up one other thing which is actually really important. I think when you apply to residency, you can apply to 2 things, I think, minimum. So like you can do like, let's say I want to be a surgeon, or you can do like emergency medicine. So it's a backup. Like if you don't get interviews in one program, then you're applying to basically 2 programs in one cycle. So that's another reason that like if you're smart in how you apply, you will match somewhere. What's really good now is because of the COVID, like when I applied to residency, I think people interview at like 60, 70 programs. I did like 10 or 11. I kind of knew where I would want to go. But we had to like fly there. You got to fly there, buy a suit and all that stuff. Then it gets tiring and it gets expensive. So now it's probably going to be over Zoom. So it's a lot easier. I think it'll be a lot easier now for many years. Just want to see it. Happy to answer anything else, or you guys can reach out to me, anytime.
I think,
Hope I was able to share some good stuff.
yeah, I think we'll wrap it up here if no one has any last minute questions. If there are any last minute questions, go ahead and send them in the chat while
I have a question. Is Freddie Gonzalez a real name or just somebody's alias?
I have that question too. Well, we can go ahead and see if,
Did he ask something? I
Oh,
saw this, or what was your question?
I was asking if it's a real name or just an alias.
Oh, it's my real name. I saw an ad over this that you were doing, so I just wanted to just learn more about it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Freddie.
we appreciate you joining. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I think I am going to end it off. So first off, thank you so much, Margus. It means a lot that you came back and did this presentation once again for me. I literally asked once and he was down to do it, so that means a lot. Thank you so much. Oh, we have one more question in Facebook. How did you know you wanted to go to med school? Why don't you answer that and then we can end it.
Well, how did I know I want to go to medical school? In the end, my dad was a doctor, so they didn't pressure me at all. My parents are super hands off, but I used to go to his office every day and see what he wanted us to do, and I couldn't think of anything else I'd want to do. I couldn't think of anything else I want to do, so I want to do that. But I want to say this interesting is like, if you go to medical school, like you don't have to think like you have to be a doctor. You can do things after. So people do medical school and they do like an MBA and masters. But the thing is like, if you do MBA and masters, it's hard to become a doctor after. So it's like, if you become a doctor, you still have a lot of avenues open to you afterwards. So that's the neat thing about it. Another reason I wanted to do it.
Yeah. Freddie is asking for your contact information if you want to go ahead and send him that in the chat.
Yeah, I'll put one of you guys my emails. I have a couple.
So I'm going to end it off. Thank you once again, Dr. Baird, for joining us. Thank you for all the honest answers, the honest information. Always appreciated. And to everyone else, thank you for joining. It means a lot to us. It's our third webinar. We're still very new, still very nervous in these startups. So thank you for joining. Thank you for supporting. If you have any ideas, I'm going to say this one more time. If you have any ideas, if you want to join us in the Udaan initiative or just Sahayaka in general, contact us at info@sahayaka.org. You will start getting our newsletters and you will learn more about the projects that we do in Sahayaka as the nonprofit and also Udaan. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and thanks to Renu for organizing it, and
Thank you.
everyone have a good night.
Yeah, good night, guys.
Thank you.